Welcome back. Often the difference between a thriving organization and one that fails is that company's level of cultural understanding and intelligence. Donna Marsh, the author of The Middle East Unveiled, a cultural and practical guide for all Western business professionals, aims to dismiss inaccurate stereotypes and expose the common fears, uncertainties and doubts that many Westerners may have when confronted with the professional challenges of working in this part of the world. To discuss this ongoing issue further with us, we are joined by the author herself, Donna Marsh. Hi, great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Tell us, how is the business environment here in the Middle East?
I think it's very thriving. I think it's very robust. And with the work that I'm doing now, with working with numbers of Western organizations throughout the world, this is one of the main focuses in terms of where organizations can continue to grow and to continue to enjoy their own corporate health.
How is business done differently here compared to, say, the United States, Europe, Asia? Can you compare?
Sure, of course. I think that when we look at the US in particular, it's all about the task. It's all about the end results. When we compare that to how business is typically done anywhere in the Middle East, it's not just exclusive to Dubai, relationships, and I'm talking about corporate level relationships, personal relationships within those organizations, tend to be, especially in the initial stages, more important than getting the actual results from a measurable point of view. If you compare the same sort of situation with, let's say, the UK, where I'm based right now, we'll be looking at perhaps a more fair and balanced way of looking at things, but it's still a matter of finding that level of patience, finding the amount of time that truly is needed before we're going to be able to see too many measurable results. When you look at the Far East, there's generally a bit more familiarity in many of those cultures in terms of establishing levels of relationships. However, the methodology of doing them might be quite different compared to here.
Tell us, where do businessmen and women have to be really careful when working or doing business here in the Middle East?
I would say two things are very important and aren't always obvious in some other cultures. And that is the preservation of face. And when I say face, I'm talking about one's status, one's reputation. That tends to be much more important here than in some other parts of the world. Whereas, again, let's use the US or Europe, it's nothing personal. Okay, and that can cause an awful lot of business people to get themselves possibly quite inadvertently into some difficulties. The other thing that I would say, and it's one lesson that I'm continuing to learn after more than 30 years, is to learn to manage one's own patience.
You're a businesswoman. For many years you've been working in the Middle East. Tell us about your own experiences here in this region.
I started a very long time ago. The first time I stepped foot in the Middle East was actually in the late 1970s. I would say that the acceleration in my business background was in excess of 20 years now, and it's been throughout all of the Middle East. I would say that lots of people who were visitors, especially that far back, almost were novelties, especially business women. Now, having said that, there's an awful lot of stereotypes that I'd like to dispel. I actually found that in many cases, establishing the relationships, being very sincere, following up on what you say, even if it's something very simple as, I'll give you a call next week. Maybe you don't have the information you're hoping to have next week. Make that call anyway because you've got the consistency of your word. Once that happens, I tend to find that by establishing my credibility and my own reputation, that in many ways it was more comfortable working here than it could have been, for example, in the City of London or some other very traditional environments.
What made you write this book? Was there a big lack of understanding you felt needs mentioning?
Sometimes I think that I've seen it all and then I surprise myself. Just the other day in the metro, for example, I saw clearly a Western man walking around in very short shorts that left very little to the imagination, shall we say. And he was completely oblivious. And to top it all off, he walked into the women and children's carriage, completely unaware of what he was doing on so many levels. Now, that isn't even an example of business, but that's something that's purely cultural awareness, and in this particular example, lack thereof. I think that when I first started traveling to this region, there really wasn't a whole lot of other information. There was a little bit of experience from those who went before us, although when I did a lot of new business development, I was the first person. And some of those lessons that I learned the hard way as well. and to be able to help people see some of the things that tend to be very, very important. Some things we can learn along the way, but some things that can be unrecoverable errors. And part of the motivation for this book is to help people try to avoid the worst of those excesses or slights or offenses.
Do you think working in the Middle East is for everyone? Who would you recommend not to come here?
I want to turn it around just for a minute, and I would say that I would, in theory, challenge people to consider themselves as candidates for coming to the Middle East. I think that there's an awful lot of negative stereotyping in most Western media that may be putting people off, or maybe it puts off their families and friends. So from that point of view, I think that there could be a lot more of an opportunity for people to at least consider coming to the area. Now, there are some people that probably should think very, very hard about whether it's for them. Those would be people who aren't overly flexible, those who maybe have an extraordinarily arrogant attitude towards their culture being the right way or the only way. That doesn't work very well anywhere in the world. We can talk about that going between the UK and France. I mean, we're not even crossing Europe, are we? But it's especially important when we're looking at situations here. And again, someone who isn't able to control their emotions, especially the negative ones, and especially those that are concerning a true need to find the patience that's deep inside you.
So at the end of the day, take it all with a pinch of salt then.
I think that's really fair.
Thank you very much for coming in today,
That's
Donna.
my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, that's it from the business desk. You can contact us at news@city7tv.com. Up next, Laura Buckwell is back with the news.